Well, the business of golf course architecture has gone global. I'm Biv Wadden with DevotedGolfer.tv, and I'm joined here today with Jason Straka of Straka Global Golf Course Design. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Every golfer has at one point fancied themselves as being their own golf course architect. How did you get into this? And it's quite a lot of work, isn't it, to become capable to practice this profession?
It is a lot of work. As a matter of fact, we joke in our firm that we've had people that have offered to come work for us that were retired doctors even, and come and work for free. And we said, go back to school for another 8 years, get a few more years of experience, and then come see us. And if you still want to work for free, then we'll have you.
Because you're truly architects, and architectural school for most architects is much longer than 4 years, isn't it?
No, it sure is, and particularly in this business, because you have to have a background in agronomy and construction, and so it's not just the landscape architecture part of it, but there's a lot more that goes into it.
So as a youth, how did you think I wanted to become a golf course architect?
I was a competitive junior golfer, but I knew that I wasn't as good as I needed to be, to make it to a top level, even as a PGA, not a tour pro, but just a club pro. And so, but I loved golf so much that I really wanted to stay in the profession, and I loved architecture, and so the two were just a perfect marriage together. So I followed in my father's footsteps. I started working on the golf course when I was young in the maintenance side of things, and then I just continued on into architecture.
Was your father a ground superintendent?
He took care. He was worked in the large estate side of landscape architecture, but then he started working on a golf course, and so that's how I got hooked into that part of it.
Good, good. Tell us a little bit about your design philosophy and how that design philosophy has evolved.
I pride myself, and our firm prides itself on an environmental background. And so that's something that I knew that I wanted to do early on in my career, was really to focus on the environmental sensitivity of golf. Way back at the turn of the century, and long before, golf courses were considered to be very good environmental stewards. And then sometime in the 60s, 70s, 80s, people would say that the golf industry and golf courses sort of lost its way in the environmental side of things. And so I really wanted to correct that and bring it back to where it was traditionally. And so I focus a lot of my studies at the university level in the environmental realm of things. And that's what we really focus and specialize in now. So we have lots and lots of projects that are heading up around the world focused on the environmental quality of golf.
So talk about some of the environmental issues that you find most
well, certainly use of water is really the biggest one. It's tough in today's economy. We're working primarily overseas, and so where you've got developing countries that are struggling to maybe even feed their people, and what do you do with water? And so it's tough to explain that golf courses can use water wisely, and that it's better for the environment than a lot of other industries. And so, that's one aspect, and of course, then you have the use of pesticides and fertilizers, and there's just a lot of, misinformation out there, is the best way to put it.
Talk a little bit about the architects that have influenced you, older architects, newer architects.
Well, old architect, I'd say one of my favorite would have been Alistair McKenzie. I really loved his bunkering style. And some of his, of course, classic golf courses, people were very familiar with them, from Augusta National to Cypress Point. And so, I've studied and read a lot of his writing, literature, and I like a lot of that style. Modern day golf courses, it's people say, are you really going to list your favorite modern day, because aren't they your competitors? And I say, you know what, it's they're colleagues of mine,
and there has to be a few that influenced you.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd say probably that two of the ones that have influenced me the most would have been Tom Fazio. And what's interesting is some people know, but not a lot, that my partner Dana Fry actually got to start in the golf industry working for Tom Fazio. Worked for him for 6 years, and was
That's
really
a great pedigree.
It is a great pedigree, and worked for Tom out in the field, shaping a lot of his most famous golf courses. And, he started off working at Ventana Canyon out in the desert Southwest, in Wade Hampton, North Carolina, and even Lake Nona here in Florida. Of course, we're at the PGA show now. So, and then so Tom Fazio certainly was one of them, and Pete Dye is probably another one. So I love Pete just simply because he knows how to push buttons and push the envelope. So sorry, Pete, but that's intended as a compliment.
Well, you've had the really fortunate opportunity to be involved in the building of a U.S. Open golf course, Erin Hills in southern Wisconsin. I'm from northern Illinois, and I have not played there yet, but a lot of my friends have gone up there, and they've come back, and they've said, wow, what a golf course. Tell us what it's like to build a U.S. Open golf course from scratch. Most of the U.S. Open courses are almost 100 years old, and you got to build one from scratch.
Yeah, that was certainly an honor. You know, we didn't start off as with the intent that it was going to be a U.S. Open golf course. The original owner of Erin Hills, Bob Lang, always had in his mind that it was something that he was interested in. You know, he was a bit of a golfer, but not a super avid golfer. And so we have so many different clients that say, we want to build a golf course that's going to host a major championship. Well, you know, there's 14,000+ golf courses in the United States, and there's only so many major championships, you know, 2 of which, you know, are pretty much locked in. One's, you know, of course, at Augusta, and one overseas. And so when he started talking about U.S. Open, we said, well, you know, it's certainly is a good goal to have, but, you know, it's pretty difficult goal to obtain. And sure enough, he wrote folks at the USGA and said, we have this wonderful piece of property, would you come out and see it? And lo and behold, they came out and saw it and were just enamored with it. And so as we started into the construction, then that became apparent that it was something which was real, and you know, we had to sort of double our efforts in terms of focusing on the absolute most elite players, you know, in the world, you know, rather than the 99.9% of the rest of us.
Right, and as we know, the scoring at the U.S. Open is intended to not be low, but to just end up where that winner ends up 1, 2, 3 under, not 15 under, not 20 under.
That's right.
So talk a little bit about the challenges that you had in building a golf course that would protect par against the best players in the world.
You know, the USGA is really keen on doing sort of their test runs, and so it hosted a ladies tournament at first just to see, you know, how an event would function there. And then, of course, it hosted the U.S. Amateur in 2011. And, of course, those golfers are, you know, are pretty darn good, too. And so, in fact, they hit it probably just as far or farther than the tour players. And so that became the dry run or the test run for it. And then we saw how the golf course reacted and played at that level, and then made a few changes, you know, even after that. So there were a few greens which were softened or which were, you know, beefed up a little bit, if you will. You know, but it was interesting just to sort of get into the USGA's mind of things, of having golf par 4s in a golf course that was intended to be difficult, you know, fair but difficult. But we would have many par 4s over 500 yards long, where again, it's you know, in my best days, you know, maybe I can get there in 2 shots, you know, but they're expected to be hitting mid-irons into these holes.
So when you're trying to build a hole that's going to protect par, it's not just about length. There's other design features, particularly the green sites and the movement in the greens. Talk about your thinking, you know, as far as, you know, generating movement in greens. Is there anything that you like brought to the table there that you think our viewers might be interested in?
Yeah, that's Erin Hills, and a lot of people, they don't know it now, but they will when they watch the Open. It's an all fescue golf course, except for the greens. And so it's, when people think of fescue, they think of the long, unmowed grass at the British Open. But the British Open golf course is the fairways and the tees, and in some cases the greens there too are fescue. And so it becomes much more of a ground game. And when you see Erin Hills, it truly is an open, we call it a glacial links. So there's no ocean, obviously, nearby at Erin Hills, but it's a really similar type of terrain.
And a few trees, I imagine.
And just a few trees, just a few specimen trees, and that's it. And so the landscape, what we call, is just wild and tumbling in this glacial links. And so golfers, you know, when you think of traditional U.S. Open golf courses, it's more of an aerial game. But Erin Hills, it's going to be much more of a ground game. So it's not, well, I hit my drive down the middle of the fairway, and so long as I've done that, you know, then I'm okay. At Erin Hills, when the ball hits the fairway, it's going to start to bounce and roll. And if you don't read the contours of the ground, you might think you hit a good shot. In reality, you didn't.
So that's interesting. Not only did you have to think about designing movement into the greens, but also into the fairways and the surrounds and all throughout the golf course.
That's right, and how the bunker's laid out in those natural contours. And if you come into a particular greens complex from the wrong angle, what's going to happen if you land the ball short or you land the ball long, and how greens were maybe tipped away from the line of play. And then we also, it's a public golf course, and so it still has to be flexible for every other week of the year. So it's a challenge to do both.
So for the real architectural nerds that are viewing this, what's your favorite grass that you're putting down on greens these days?
The favorite grass?
What's the hot, fastest grass? That's the most heat tolerant and disease tolerant.
Well, there's a lot of new bent grasses.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, you know what? I don't want to get in trouble with all my grass friends out there. But bent grass is certainly is much more preferred even in today's market. Simply just because they provide.
And I'm talking warm season, northern. I'm from Chicago. So
You're from Chicago, yeah. So bent grasses typically is still the best way to go in the northern climates.
But what, like A1, A4,
we have a lot. We have a lot of A1, A4. Absolutely. I'd say we have countless A1, A4. 007's another good one that's out there now.
But you don't have you're not willing to.
Well, you know what? The truthful answer is, as an environmental architect, it depends on the climate. It really does. And so, just because we're building a golf course in, say, New Jersey, and bent grass is a good choice, but there might be a particular kind of bent grass that would be much different than, say, Wisconsin. So different climate, and even, for example, even if we're doing two projects in the same state, it certainly might be different bent grasses too.
Good. Well, let's get to our main theme here. The business of golf course architecture has gone global.
Sure has.
Talk to us about your activities overseas. What are the big markets out there, and what are some of the countries that everyone would be surprised to hear that you're operating in?
I was paging through some of my pictures from this past year and all the different countries that Dana and I have visited, and it's like a whirlwind, to be honest.
Must be fun.
It is fun. It can be stressful at times.
Except if you got a wife and small kids at home.
That I do. That I do. God bless them, because they're certainly patient with me. Our firm is now named Fry Straka Global Golf Course Design, and the reason is that we're operating in so many different countries, and we restructured the company so that we're much more mobile, if you will. And so Dana is based out of Hong Kong, and myself here based out of the United States.
And he's living in Hong Kong.
Is, and then we have our associates now live in Lisbon, Portugal, in Torino, Italy, one in Beijing, China, and another one in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And so, and on purpose, before we used to be based just out of Ohio, and so we would get a phone call that said, well, we're interested in having you look at a project of ours, meaning a potential client. Come on over to China. Can you be here tomorrow? Well, that became a bit of a struggle. As a person would call from China, and then another one from Italy, and another one from Brazil. And so how do you handle or tackle that, that part of the business then? And so there's a conscious decision then to really sort of disperse ourselves, to where Dana and I could split and get to different parts of the world, and spend our time equally. But then if somebody called and said, well, hey, we have a particular project in France, all of a sudden now we're associated in either Lisbon, Portugal, or in Torino, Italy, could be there in a matter of a day, whereas it might take Dana or I 3, 4, 5 days to get there.
What about, I know here in the U.S., when you actually get down to the business of building a golf course, not only do you need an architect, you need a construction company, you need your ground superintendent there, kind of like, like thinking about the growing ultimately. And how do you handle all that coordination, overseas, and what are some of the issues that arise that might not arise here in the U.S.?
That's a great question. Here in the United States, there's something called the Golf Course Builders Association of America. And there are countless qualified, certified golf course builders. So if I have a project in Chicago, Illinois, where you're from, I can call up any one of, say, 40 or 50 different companies and say, here are the plans and specifications, and they're all very well qualified and well versed in building a golf course, new or a remodel. And that's what they do every day, all day, for a living. Well, when you're doing that in a place like Vietnam, all of a sudden, which has a few golf courses under construction, what do? You know, there's no Vietnamese Golf Course Builders Association, and so it becomes a very difficult challenge, particularly in cultures now which don't know very much about golf. And so all of a sudden now it becomes an education process of how do you build? Well, so you might get somebody who can move dirt, somebody who might be able to install irrigation, somebody who could plant grass, you know, but there's no one coordinated effort. And so you have to find somebody who's willing to live in those places and basically act as a general contractor.
So the U.S. construction companies, they're exporting their talent overseas to help satisfy this.
In many cases, individual, and it's until the locals, you know, the local population learns that craft or that trade, and many of them are. And when we started in China,
got some good shapers.
We do, yeah, we do. But you know, when we started in China 6-7 years ago, it was very, very difficult. You know, it still can be. You know, but the reality is now there's a lot of Chinese companies that have built a lot of golf courses, and so it's making things much easier.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I tell you, it's a fascinating story about a new strategic export that the United States has.
Yeah, it sure is.
Reduce our trade deficit with China and other countries. Jason, thanks so much for coming in, and our viewers are going to really enjoy getting a chance to hear about this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good luck to you and your firm.
Thank you.
Thank you.